So today is a discussion on mold and, you know, when to take action, how to recognize you need to take action, and remediation. Don't be scared of having to remediate mold, because sometimes it's pretty simple, and we'll get into chatting. We're very lucky to have Cheryl Pearce here, our go-to inspector for these difficult situations with mold busters. Thank you, Cheryl, for being here today.
Thank you, Eddie. So I'm just going to get started. You asked me about to talk to people about when they might need a mold inspection.
Yes.
And usually when people call me, by just asking a handful of questions, I can find out if they really need one. And usually it has to do with odors, obviously leaks or visible mold or something very suspect or obvious. And then frequently I can just send them right to a mold remediator. Sorry, somebody's calling me. I didn't turn my phone off.
But in general, like for us, we've had, say, a situation where we've had visual scenario of mold. A lot of times for us, we have maybe a tenant who has said, hey, there's mold in my unit.
Mm-hmm.
We always want to take action. So we call you up and we book a time, and
Mm-hmm.
we're super flexible on that. And then what happens? How do you brief somebody when you're coming out for an inspection, and how does it need to be so you can come and do what you need to do?
Right. So a lot of times, I work a lot with property managers, landlords, tenants, and homeowners. And tenants can order a mold inspection as long as it's non-invasive or destructive. They can certainly order one for their property they're renting. But what you want to find out is what they're really worried about. There's a lot of misinformation about mold on the internet, and people freak out about it. So a lot of times people attribute non-related health, events to mold, cancer and things like that absolutely are not associated with mold. So if you're talking to somebody, you want to find out what they're concerned about. Have they had a leak? Are they seeing visible mold, smelling odors? What are they worried about health effects? That's always something you have to ask, particularly with tenants, because of, liability and a lot of the landlord-tenant laws, particularly in San Francisco and places like Berkeley. They're very much geared towards the tenants.
Yes.
So then you find out if they're worried about health effects. You're not just going to be able to do a visual inspection and see what if you find anything suspect. You're going to have to also do air samples. And air samples are useful because it gives me information I can't get from just doing a visual inspection. By testing the air, mold spores are everywhere, and they're believed to come from outside just through normal activity, opening windows and doors and stuff. And unless you have moisture problems in the building, then you should have less of the same types of mold spores you have outside, inside. So you test the outside air for a baseline mold spore count, then you test the inside air and you compare the two. And a normal condition is where you get the same types of mold, but less of them inside. And what you have to do is put that together with the visual inspection and see if there are any suspect conditions in the areas you're testing. And suspect conditions can be leaks, obviously, where you have wet materials, where you get some of the more toxic molds that people freak out about. All of those are high moisture indicators that grow on wet building materials, particularly things like sheetrock. When sheetrock gets wet, if you don't dry it out within a short period of time, then you will get mold on it. And then some moisture conditions are just caused by high humidity, which is very common in the Bay Area. We have a lot of older houses, buildings that aren't insulated. They'll either have no insulation in the walls or the floors, or they'll have single pane windows that, you can get a lot of evaporate coming off of. So a lot of houses.
You get that water
condensation.
Condensation.
Yeah, very common. So a lot of times in the Bay Area in particular, because a lot of times you have older buildings that, in-law apartments and lower levels and floors tend to stay really cool, dark, and damp. And people tend to have mold problems in those units, if not caused by drainage issues. They tend to be just high humidity because of the location of their unit in the building. And
that process doesn't take very long, right? You come in and there is a kind of a thing where you do have a checklist of the windows cannot be open for a certain period of time for right? So
Right. When we
can you
when we
walk us through,
confirm,
can you walk us through the mechanics of that?
yeah. So once they contact me, I find out exactly what they're worried about. I give them a quote. If I need to do air samples, then I've included that in the price. So I've got just a basic price for my visual inspection, which usually takes an hour unless it's a really large property. And then I give them a quote that includes air samples based on the number of samples I would need to take based on the size of the building. So it's usually, I don't test every room, but you have to do the outside one, and then you maybe need to do 3 or 4 inside, depending on how large the space is. Then I send them a confirmation that tells them what I need them to do to get ready so I can do the air samples, which includes closing the windows the day before, turning off dehumidifiers or air purifiers. And that's really important because the dehumidifiers, I need to know what the humidity would be in the different rooms I test without that, drying out the room.
Artificial change.
Exactly. You don't want them to alter the environment. And then I come in, and what I do, it's a very comprehensive visual inspection. I'm obviously looking for odors, any type of visible mold, wet materials, water damage. It's not uncommon in older buildings. You see stains, in buildings all the time, older buildings, old water stains that, the areas are dry. You just check them with a moisture meter. But what you're really looking for are the conditions in the areas that you're going to test, because you'll get different types of mold that can be elevated, higher than outside in different rooms based on the conditions. And sometimes it's tricky. Sometimes you'll go into a bathroom or something. My moisture meter reads behind the surface, so I can find moisture behind tile, where the plumbing is. You don't necessarily see any evidence that there's a leak behind the tile, but the meter will tell me that the wall's wet, and then I know that there's some kind of a leak or something going on, behind the wall. And that's really important because you're not necessarily going to pick that up until it's done a lot of damage. And this frequently occurs in older buildings. They tend to stack the kitchens and the bathrooms. They tend to be above each other. So the upstairs neighbors will have a leak that will manifest in your ceiling. And then you can find it in both places. You can find out what's happening upstairs and down.
We've experienced that.
So what I do a comprehensive visual inspection. If I need to do air samples, I do them. I'm an old clinical microbiologist, so I don't usually test mold I can see. I think it's kind of a waste of money. But if I need to have proof that it's like a normal mold, like for example, on single pane windows, you get this common black mold it's not Stachybotrys, the toxic black mold. Lots of molds are black. It's Cladosporium, which is a very common mold. It's benign, and you get it on single pane windows. You get it in the bathroom if you don't have good ventilation. That's what you get up on the ceiling or on the tile. So you want to be able, if you need to prove that it's not the bad mold because it's black, then you might take a swab or surface sample. And a lot of times, if there's potentially litigation that might be involved, and I know I need to prove that it's, this normal mold, or even just prove what it is, then I will sample it. But usually I try to just do air samples if I need them, because that gives me information I can't get from looking at it. So then when I write my report, I'm explaining the lab results. I'm explaining what I saw during my visual inspection, my moisture meter readings, my humidity readings, because I need to tell them what to do if the mold isn't normal, how to get it to a normal level, how to get rid of the mold, and then how to address the moisture problems that caused it so it won't come back. And what I'm seeing, and then I write out, if you need professional remediation, what I do is I write up a detailed scope of work, site-specific, kitchen, bathroom, master bedroom, any area that you need it. I write out a detailed scope of work that says exactly what to do in those areas. If you need professional remediation, I give you referrals, or you could just shop it around because now you have a scope of work. Someone has come in, diagnosed the problem, and told you what you need to do.
And that's what I found really great with the process for you, and how I found it to be something where it doesn't break the bank in our scenarios, because you give that detailed report. We can get the GC that we kind of normally rely on. They come in and kind of, sometimes you might just have, for a particular area, replace this piece of trim and clean this wall with this material, and that area is taken care of.
Right.
And then what we've done with this scenario is you come back afterwards to confirm that the correct things have been done. So you kind of, you kind of dot the I's and cross the T's by coming back after the
Yeah,
remediation is done.
yeah, the post remediation inspection and clearance testing, and that's really important, especially if you're selling the property or you need some kind of, you're going to have to disclose you had a mold problem, then you really want to have that. You don't always need to do it. If you're the homeowner, you don't necessarily have to have it. You might want to have it because down the line, when you go to sell the house, if you disclose you had a leak and it was professionally remediated, frequently people will say, did you have it tested afterwards or inspected?
Yeah.
And you're getting all the photographs before and after, that kind of thing. But a lot of times in the Bay Area in particular, a lot of times when you have mold on an uninsulated exterior wall, for example, the wall isn't wet. It's just sweating because there's no insulation in it. So you can have mold behind furniture up against walls that border the outside. That doesn't have to be, sometimes it does need to be, you don't have to cut the wall out. You can clean it. And then you can blow insulation into the wall. There's different ways to keep that from happening again. But sometimes if the wall is actually wet, you do have to cut it out, particularly if there's plumbing involved, because the plumbing, you have to get to whatever's causing the leak. So you have to open it up anyway. And where you want to be careful when you do this, because a lot of contractors will do this kind of work, and it's not a big deal, but if you have tenants or homeowners, especially people who are nervous about mold, living in a building where you need to open something up, where you may have mold trapped up inside the ceiling or something, then you really want to be careful just doing that without doing any of the procedures that contain the area or keep it from spreading. If it's a vacant building, it's really not a big deal. But when you have people living there, I get a lot of calls from tenants who freak out about this stuff. And what's important is if you have to do something destructive that could open up a moldy area, you want to be careful doing that when people have their stuff in there and they're living in the building, because that's something that it can really be a problem if they think that you've done something to contaminate the space.
So properly kind of, almost, not that we want to move on to other, but like dealing with like lead remediation, where you're just trying to stop the particles of paint from spreading in
yeah, that's different, because you can get away with just sort of encapsulating the surfaces. But with mold, you either have wet materials that you have to remove, or you have just surface mold caused by condensation. It can be cleaned. And what I usually do, I have a DIY email I send out to people if it's something that they can do themselves, and it just tells them, what to use, what type of antifungal to use. I've got a really good antifungal coating that you can now buy on Amazon. You used to have to buy it from an environmental supply place in Hayward when I did remediation, but now Amazon has it, and you don't have to buy 5 gallons of it like you used to. So I just give them the links and the leaks, and just say, buy this, clean the wall, let it dry, coat it with this clear antifungal coating. It's got microban in it, it's not going to come back. And then what you may want to do to solve the problem is blow some insulation into the wall. Or sometimes, if the walls are wet and you have to remove them, then obviously you want to add batting insulation before you put the wall back or address the leak or whatever you have to do. But the DIY information is really useful, because a lot of times these are just real simple things that people can do themselves. And I either write it up, where you could have a remediator do it. And when I give you referrals, the people I refer to, they know exactly what to do. They look at the report. There's one page on the report that has the remediation recommendations, and they'll come out real quickly, look at it, and then be able to bid it out. So it sort of speeds up the whole process. And
but that again is one of the things I appreciate about your process is you're not upselling like a big corporate company that's has loads of vans driving around and where they're like, hey, we have to sell these services.
Absolutely not.
No, there's it's like, hey, this is a pretty simple issue here. Here's your DIY instructions, and you can take care of it.
Yeah, and if I don't think it's something you can DIY, particularly when it's an occupied space, then I tell you, I highly recommend you get this remediated. And you can use whoever you want. Once somebody tells you what to do, and writes it up, you can hire a company that knows how to do that. And even with contractors, they can look at that and more or less, they can't always do everything on it, with the same procedures, but they can take some minimal precautions and put up some plastic and try to contain the area where they're working.
So what type of costs, when it comes into just for you to come and do the visual inspection and then a few air tests and then that kind of stuff? Like, what's fairly typical for the Bay Area for, like, what do you feel like is the most common kind of cost you're invoicing people?
Well, if you go online and try to search for mold inspections, there's lots of different prices, but it's all, I've seen reports. Some of the companies out there, they don't write a very comprehensive report. They just send you a lab report, which is absolutely useless for lay people. They don't know.
Like double Dutch to me.
Yeah, what does it mean? But there are a lot of different levels of this that you could get, and sometimes I get calls from people and they have other reports that don't tell you what to do. They come out and they do some samples and send you a lab report. They don't actually give you specific recommendations, and not just on how to get rid of the mold, but how to address the moisture problems that cause it so it won't come back. And that's the key to this. So the prices are kind of all over. What I charge for my inspection is $4.95, and then the samples are $85 each. You always have to take a minimum of 2 because of the outside one. But a lot of times, like for example, let's talk about maybe pre-sale or pre-purchase inspections, because I do a lot of those. And I see now that a lot of people are doing pre-sale inspections, which I think is great. They don't always need a pre-sale mold inspection, but a really good home inspector will usually point you in the right direction. They're not supposed to use the M word. They're not supposed to say mold. So sometimes they'll say discoloration or possible mold, something like that. And then you might need to get one, particularly in some houses that have been, neglected, or there's a lot of deferred maintenance and there's been leaks, like we were just talking about with elderly people and trust sales, that sort of thing. And then what you can do, I can come in, I'll do my inspection with pre-purchase or pre-sale. I always do air samples. Based on the size of the house, I do X amount. I don't do every room, but I have to be able to sign off on it, be able to say visually, this is what I saw. The air samples were normal, or in these rooms, they were abnormal. And then here's a list of what you have to do. And then you can either just disclose that when you go to sell the house so that somebody's already evaluated this and you know what you're getting into. Or you choose to fix the problem before you sell the house, but you get all the information. So the price is really based on the number of samples that you would need to do to say, okay, this 2,000 square foot house, especially if you've got different floors, you want to do at least a couple on each floor, and you don't necessarily pick, if you're any suspect areas, like I'll give you an example, these downstairs bonus rooms, the realtors always call them bonus rooms, and they're frequently are below grade. They smell a little funky unless somebody puts those.
We have one on a property right now, and it doesn't have any windows. So
yeah, well, that's never good. That's never good. Yeah. It's not. It's. I don't know if it's a real bonus, but a lot of times it's those rooms in particular. You have to be able to say, okay, these are. It smells funky and this is what's going on, or you have to be able to, say, okay, it's fine, but these are the things you're going to want to do in this room to keep it drier and, God forbid, better ventilated if you can. So you're looking for stuff like that, but the price just varies based on how many samples. And it also is based on turnaround time for the lab results. So if people need something right away, especially with clearance testing, where you may have your tenants in a hotel or people have been displaced and you want the same day results, that's more expensive than if you get them the next day or in 2 days. But so I can't really say, most of my inspections are probably they're usually around $700, but they go higher depending on, I do a lot of really big houses.
I've seen gamut on stuff, and I think that's it's very good and very, very fair. And you get a report that says, here's what you need to do to remediate and solve the problem. Because I spend a lot of time on my reports. I'm very proud of that I don't just tell you you've got a mold problem, because you pretty much a lot of times that when you call me. That's why we call.
That's right. So I want to tell you the extent of your problem and exactly what needs to be done in each area, and then what you need to do to keep this from happening. And in the Bay Area, I see a lot of the same stuff over and over because we have so many old buildings and it's so damp here year round. So there's just, and then even in within this in San Francisco and places, there's just these little microclimates. You have places where it's frequently foggy and damp, and then, you have to, there's just things that you have to be conscious of. And a lot of times people need a dehumidifier in that bonus room, or they need a HEPA air purifier, or they need to do something to keep, if you've got something going on down there and you get rid of the problem, you definitely have to do something to keep it drier or better ventilated so it won't come back. So that's a big part of what I do. And then the remediation, you asked me about that. I can't tell you what that cost. Years ago, I used to do it when I bought this business. The old owner did it. He was a contractor, and I did it for a while with him involved. I hated doing it, but I learned a lot. You really learn a lot when you do it, because you get to see everything from how it looks, how it manifests. You get to open walls, which is kind of cool. But that it just depends on how much, how the extent of what they have to do. But our guidelines are written in such a way where you do remove wet, moldy materials, you clean everything, you dry everything, you scrub the air. That's really important, that you clean the air with those big air scrubber fans. And then someone like me can come back and re-inspect, check to make sure everything's dry and the air samples are clean. And then you get like a nice clearance report with photos that just signs off on it. And then if you sell your house years later, you've got something to disclose that shows, start to finish what was done.
Yeah.
And that's really what people want to see,
Totally. And, we've had situations where we've tenant occupied buildings that are getting sold, and, sometimes the tenants will use something like mold as a kind of a retaliation.
Yeah.
They're angry at the old landlords.
Mm-hmm.
And in that period where it's transferring from one owner to another owner, this is the kind of the spanner that gets thrown into the works.
That's true. That happened. Sorry to interrupt, Eddie. That happened a lot when they were lifting the COVID moratorium.
Yeah.
A year ago, whatever that was. A lot of landlords, I got a lot of calls from people for just bogus, I've got mold, and they were trying to renegotiate their rent, or they didn't want to pay the back rent, whatever the reason was. Most of them were not legitimate at all. And it was just an excuse, to come up with something. But with tenants, as you know, you have to be really careful, because there's so much information about mold.
The thing is that it has to be treated like it could be something serious, like there's a
that's right
chance. So we always, and that's, we go in,
you don't know
that manner. You don't know, you have to treat it like it is.
That's exactly right. You don't know, and you get in trouble if tenants start complaining about mold. You almost always have to do something. I talk to a lot of landlords, and I don't like to waste money, but if they're complaining and they say, I'm sick, my kid's sick, there's no way around doing air samples, and a visual inspection to just make sure that there's, and a lot of times there is something legitimate, but most landlords are attentive. They don't want people living in unhealthy conditions, and they definitely don't want their property, not being taken care of.
We do have a question.
I saw that.
Yeah, so it's, what is the typical cost of re-inspection?
That's it. The re-inspection, so you've already paid for the initial inspection and you've had remediation done. So the re-inspection is about $100 cheaper, the inspection part of it. And then the samples are just in the areas that were affected that need to be retested. So it always an outside sample, and then one or two, the kitchen or the bathroom, whatever needed remediation. And then the price for those is either same day results, delivery charge plus, rush fee, next day results, or 2-day results. So just to give you an example, same day results is like $150 a sample. So if you needed 2 of those and the inspection, you're looking at like $695. And then for next day, they're $110 each. So that's like what, $100 cheaper. And then 2-day results is my standard turnaround time. Then it's like, $565. So it just depends on how soon you need the results, and then how many areas were affected that we have to retest.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. So, and you have in your name there, your website. That's kind of the best place. People can call you, or they can go to your website. The great thing with your website is you do have a contact form where it asks a few questions.
Right.
You're very good at just asking those anyway if somebody calls you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always try to take the time to talk to people and answer their questions, but more importantly, to find out what they're worried about, because a lot of times they don't need a mold inspection. or I don't think they do, and I'll tell them that. But sometimes when they do, especially like we said with tenant situations or something like that, there's no way around, doing it once it's gotten to that point. But a lot of times by just asking a few questions, why do you think you need one? Especially with pre-purchase, I get a lot of calls for people that think they need those. And there's usually just a handful of reasons, like the buyers have had a bad mold experience, or someone they know did. They have kids with allergies, or they have allergies, or there was something in the disclosures about leaks or old water damage or mold or odors. And then they're like, I want to get this checked out before I buy the property.
The other one that we found for on our sales end is when we have buyers or clients who've had a bad experience with mold, or maybe been in a place where they did have some sort of an issue, and they just, because they've gone through something with it somewhere else, they make it just the standard of practice for everywhere they go that they're doing this.
You're exactly right. Yeah, they want to know that there's something, they're not moving into another place that's got any. You're exactly right about that. Yeah. And there are also a lot of people with underlying conditions, autoimmune diseases, Lyme disease, chronic fatigue, people that are hypersensitive to normal levels of mold. And that's hard for them to move almost, they have to be really careful about where they live and try to keep their immediate environment really clean, but they definitely don't want to get into a place where they could have any sort of, health issues because of the conditions. And sometimes you just have to, you're going to find normal levels of mold in there, but it may be something that they just have to be really,
they're so sensitive to even the normal level.
That's right.
You're fantastic. We at Elevation Real Estate love working with you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Eddie.
Appreciate everything that you do. And then so to get it correct, it is moldbusters.net is how we find you online.
Correct. And then I have a contact form that just has a few quick questions that just usually it can allow me to give you a quote over the internet with a list of services and fees, so you know what I'm going to do, or I'll call you, or let's just I'll want to talk to you and just get some information, or just call. A lot of times I don't answer the phone right away because I'm in appointments. So if you send the contact form, it's much easier for me to get back to you and then just find out if it's something I can go ahead and bid out, over the internet.
What is your contact phone number, just so we can put it out there?
It's 415-731-MOLD, which is 6653.
6653.
Yeah.
Is that the code word for mold? We just say, hey, I have a 6653. I have a 6653.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, Cheryl, thank you so much. Any questions? I'll open it up if anybody has any other questions before we sign off for today. What geographical area?
Thanks for asking that, Lori. I'm in San Francisco. I live in Marin, so Marin County, Berkeley, Oakland, El Cerrito, most of the not eastern Contra Costa County, but everything kind of close to the bay. And then I go down. I don't really go further down than probably Burlingame. Sometimes I go to San Mateo or Palo Alto, but not very often. So, but certainly a little down the peninsula, Daly City. I go to Pacifica, the fog belt, the outer Richmond, outer Sunset, Daly City, and the Richmond, all of the fog belt I do cover. But just
I think the last one we had you through was a Daly City listing, I think.
Daly City, and then every now and then I'll go. I go to Walnut Creek. One of my oldest clients is a retirement complex out in Walnut Creek, and they were one of my original clients from 17 years ago. So I still go out there. It's a lovely people that run it, and they take really good care of this old building. It's an older complex, but I still go out there, but not usually that far east. But awesome. I do make exceptions.
All right, excellent. So I think that's a wrap, and you're fantastic. As I said, we appreciate all that you do, and thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. Happy holidays to everyone.
Cheers. Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.